Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another brand new Never Wrong, Maybe Right show. Today, we're going to be doing our college football show going into week 6, but today is going to be more of a future projection show, right? We're as well as talking about Colorado, the biggest story in college sports, obviously. And today, I'm going to be joined by a special guest, Ryan Ornstein, in just a moment. But on today's episode, we're going to touch on the USC Colorado showdown this past weekend, 48-41 USC. We're going to look ahead to the future playoff, the 14 playoff, and think about which teams might make it and which teams won't. We'll touch on some Heisman talk as well. And so I'll go ahead and bring in the special guest here, Ryan.
Hello, hello. Happy to be on.
Appreciate it. Give you a name here. And then awesome. Okay. So Ryan, so I think we'll just kick things off here with the obviously there's a showdown, biggest story in college sport, or I'd say in sports in general. I don't know about you, I don't know how you feel, but one of the biggest stories in sports, Colorado, Deion Sanders and whatnot, lost in a tough, close game, 48-41 to USC this past weekend. I wanted to hear your thoughts on the game, maybe briefly on the team and the storyline and story as a whole, and then more specifically the game as well.
Sounds good. Well, to start off, I got to give my utmost respect and credit to Coach Deion. I was really low on Colorado heading onto the year. They're a great start, kind of put me in check. So I apologize for my wrong predictions there. He's completely turned around this one-win program, brought college football back to life. You see superstars, everyone talking great about them, and they do deserve their credit. However, what I think we've seen over these past 2 weeks is they're not quite at the elite of the elite level yet. There's still plenty of time for this program to build, bring in these 4 and 5 stars in, and soon Colorado may be a powerhouse, and they might even take prime control over the Big 12 next year. And I'm really looking forward to what they do in the future. But in the now, it's quite clear that their offensive line is super weak. They don't get enough pressure, and they need a more balanced offensive game plan. What I saw personally especially the last couple of drives, is the clock management and the offensive play calling really hurt them against SC. They had a chance to come back, possibly tie it, and they just really were. There was no pep in their step. Bad play calling. Really disappointed there. But hey, you got to give them credit. They hung in there with one of the top teams in college football with USC. Of course, Caleb Williams pulled it out. It really showed how weak the USC defense really is. It was a tale of two halves. The first half, SC dominated, and then the second half, Shedeur, credit to him, got the team back, and it was a great comeback. But overall, I'd say the Colorados, they're not quite there yet, but they did a great job showing that they have some fight, and I got to give respect to that as well.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with what you said there. I think it's kind of clear that they have exceeded expectations thus far, right? Obviously, the two disappointing losses to Oregon and USC, but I think the level of disappointment there almost comes from the fact that they kind of reset expectations through the first 3 games, right? So there was talk of they're going up against the defending runner-up last year in TCU. You're thinking, okay, you'll probably lose that game, maybe beat Nebraska and Colorado State. You win that game, you beat Colorado State and Nebraska. You're thinking, oh, is this really happening, right? So it kind of maybe raise people's expectations for this year further than they actually should be, right? We see some teams, or we see themselves consistently struggle to run the ball, like you hinted at. They actually were able, surprisingly enough, to run the ball okay this past week. But before this past week, right, they were dead last out of the 134 FBS Division I teams in terms of running the football. Yards per game, that is, right? Constant pressure on Shedeur, as you mentioned, with the O-line. The play calling was questionable in the second half, specifically the fourth quarter. The third quarter was, I would say, much better, right? That you saw them move the ball a lot more. And even you saw the final drive before halftime, right? The Shedeur Sanders touchdown run there. But you can see that the trend and the trajectory this program is going with all the attention it gathers, right? You see all these 4 and 5 stars thinking like, oh man, I get to play on, in front of the biggest audiences in college football every weekend. I got all, these scouts and brands for even, whether it's brands for NIL stuff and companies, or it's NFL scouts, depending on how good of a player you are. The level of attention they're getting is extraordinary. And so who wouldn't want to go play there with them in the future, right? So you hinted at the Big 12 next year. With them losing Texas and Oklahoma, that could be a major piece in them being a real threat to win the conference next year. I will touch on USC a bit briefly here before we get into our next segment. Caleb Williams was phenomenal for the first 3 quarters. You saw the offense start to die down a bit in the fourth quarter, but I don't know. Maybe you feel differently. I want to hear your opinion in a sec. I kind of don't put as much stock into offenses once they get up by a large score. To me, it's almost like they're kind of like, we got it covered. It's more of a, when you get up by that much, right? It was 34-7 right before half. They were up 41-14 at one point. To me, I almost feel like teams tend to play not to lose at that point rather than playing to win. They tone the aggressiveness down a little bit because of the risk result, strip sacks, maybe some picks, whatever, if they be too aggressive when they're up by that much. And that's how other teams get back in the game, right? So what do you I mean, you obviously you're watching the game. Did you put much stock into their offense kind of dying down at the end, or is it kind of whatever?
I'm in the belief that the brakes should never come off. You got to keep going 100%, especially when, like you said, a mishap happens. We saw an uncharacteristic Caleb Williams interception. He thought he had enough arm power. He didn't. Oh well, turns the ball over. Because of that mistake, you let Colorado get right back into it, and a lot of that had to do with the lack of aggression that SC that they were showing in the first half. If they kept on normal game plan, like if they were playing against Oregon or Washington or any other powerhouse, they would keep on going because they know they can come back. I think they kind of underestimated Colorado's ability to get back in the game, and because of that, they kind of hit the brakes on their aggressive play calling. And you saw Caleb looking down the field less often. They were running it a lot more, and they were fine. They were okay. It was serviceable for a win, but it was really close. And at the end of the day, it's unacceptable for it to come down to a one possession game when you had such a large lead. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. I mean, you're looking at a team that is ranked number 8th in the country for a reason going into that game, right? You're looking at a team that was number 10 Oregon last week, beating them 42-6, right? And so you kind of wish that they would kind of, USC as a number eight team in the country would showcase that they're on the same tier as Oregon. And I'm not saying they're not, but you just saw a common opponent play back-to-back weeks and the score was drastically different, right? Not saying that USC is drastically worse or better than Oregon, but just something to point out, something to notice, You did hint on the Caleb Williams interception there. I think that can lead us right into our next topic. The Heisman race. Obviously Caleb Williams is the reigning winner in that. Is he still your favorite? Is it Michael Penix? Is it someone else? Ewers, someone else who you have in the Heisman, or is it a unanimous decision here? What do we got on your end?
It is, in my opinion, it actually was consistent the entire season. It's been Caleb for me. I think the eye test is really underrated. I think you need to really put in perspective of watching these games. And when I watch Caleb Williams, I see an NFL ready quarterback. This guy is a game changer. He takes control of the offense. He makes plays. He extends plays. His pocket presence is incredible. And not to mention, he has all the stats. He's got 1,600 passing yards, fantastic. He's got 24 total touchdowns. He leads the league in that. One interception, and it happens. Everyone's going to make mistakes here and there. And don't get me wrong, Michael Penix has done a fantastic job for Washington. Washington's going through the roof. They're on an insane win streak right now, heading into the previous season, and he's played great. But my Heisman candidate right now is Caleb, and I think my top three would be Caleb number one, definitely Penix number two, and I think number three is interesting. And I think I'm going to have to give the edge to Quinn Ewers because that Texas team looks great. I would say Jaden Daniels if LSU didn't have 2 losses, but unfortunately they do, because Daniels has looked fantastic. But Quinn Ewers is my number three. Things can change. I think the Heisman race will become much more shaken up once all these teams are playing better opponents. Like we got to see how Caleb does against a tougher Oregon defense, against a better Washington team. If once he shines in those games, then we'll kind of see who is stepping ahead of the rest of the pack. But as of right now, it's Caleb Williams for me.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think we can all acknowledge, aside from the Quinn Ewers Alabama game, the competition has not quite been there for any of these teams yet, right? In terms, a lot of their tougher games are going to be coming up in the near future. I almost think that with the Heisman, I don't know if you would agree with this or not. I think on the Heisman, part of the obviously it's a stat award, right? It's a wins combined with stats award, in my opinion. But I almost feel like, you look at a guy like Michael Penix who had been running roughshod through the league or through his first 4 games, and then you see him come up against an Arizona team and not throw a single touchdown pass, right? And so that's something where, the team won 31-24, right? It was a closer game than we would have thought, but that's a game where if he throws for 4 touchdowns there, the stats look great, right? Throws for 0, kind of falls back in the Heisman race because of that, right? Now, if USC played, when they played Colorado, Caleb had 6 touchdowns. If he throws for 1 and they run for 6, that's kind of like, does he take a step back, right? So I think that it's almost like when you play these bad teams, it's almost helpful to just to boost the stats for that exact reason, I think. So you mentioned you had Caleb the entire season. I actually did not. I had Penix for a majority of the year so far. Up until this past point, I did switch to Caleb this past game, partly because of Caleb was throwing for about 280, 290 a game. But you look at Michael Penix. I mean, week 1, 450, 5 touchdowns. Week 2, 410, 3 touchdowns. Week 3, 480, 4 touchdowns. Week 4, 300, 4 touchdowns. The passing numbers are there along with the touchdowns. Has 2 picks. Caleb has 1 this past week, but we saw the 0 touchdowns this past week, and because Colorado or USC got what is at least this up to this point a better win in Colorado than what Washington has so far, I had to switch to Caleb Williams. Partially because of that, partially because of the 24 touchdowns, total touchdowns compared to the Penix 16, or is it 18? Is it?
I believe he has 16.
16, yeah, 16. So, and also 1 less interception to the 2. As you know, I'm a big TD to INT ratio guy, playing a clean game, turnovers and whatnot. So I factor that in a lot. I do believe that it's a 2-horse race, partially because of the offenses they play, right? You look at a guy like Bo Nix, who the offense is a top 5 scoring offense in the conference, but they are such an effective run team that there's less passing stats, there's less rushing touchdowns, right? So that's something where it almost tends to hurt him because of that fact, right? He's only, 3 touchdowns here, 3, 2, 3, 3, and 4 were his respective touchdown numbers this season, right? 280, 360, 240, 270. Whereas Michael Penix, the Washington barely runs the ball. They sling the ball the whole time, right? So it's also partially offense, right? Play calling as well, which can hurt or help someone, in my opinion. You mentioned Ewers. Ewers is an interesting one. He's already had his Heisman moment, in my opinion, in Alabama. I almost think that the race could come down to how the Pac-12 quarterbacks play against each other, right? Does one of those teams go undefeated and then play, one of them plays well against both other teams, and it's like, okay, well, he's got it, right? Or like, obviously the safe bet is Caleb, but that's not to discredit him, right? But what if Michael Penix and Washington go out and beat USC and Oregon, and he has great stats in all those games, and jumps them because of those 2 wins, right? So that's a question I have. I have Caleb right now. Do you think that you mentioned you had Caleb the whole up until now, and you still have him? Do you think that he needs to go at least 1-1? Obviously, we know the Pac-12 schedule is brutal. Do you think that he needs to win, go undefeated, lose 1, lose just 1 game? Can he lose 2? Can he lose to both? Can he lose to both Washington and Oregon and still win it, in your opinion? Or does he need to win at least 1 of those 2 games to win it?
I don't think he actually needs to win even the Pac-12 or even have an appearance in the Pac-12 championship, because I think especially this Colorado game was perfect because it shows that no matter how great Caleb is, their defense is so atrocious that they're going to lose games. And I have SC losing to Oregon and Washington later on in the season. We'll get into that later. But because of that, I still think Caleb can still win the Heisman because he's still clearly, in my eyes, the best player in college football. We can't discredit him because his defense isn't that good. But if Penix plays great, wins the Pac-12, gets a playoff appearance, and has great counting stats, then maybe you do lean toward Penix because of the better team. I think it's unfair. Team-wise, it's more of an individual stat, in my opinion. But like you said, the race will be more clear once these quarterbacks start to play against each other, see how they do, and we just got to wait until the season goes on a little longer to make more clear predictions.
I like the point you mentioned there. You mentioned that the defense is so atrocious. We saw it right on display, 41 points to Colorado compared to Oregon only giving up 6 to Colorado. I think that actually plays into his favor a bit, right? So you go back to the ASU USC game 2 weeks ago, and you're thinking, well, Michael Penix or Bo Nix or Quinn Ewers or Jaden Daniels or Jordan Travis or any of those guys, they might have been out of the game in late third quarter because their team was up by so much, because USC's defense struggled in that game compared with USC's offense being kind of mediocre for the first part. It allowed them to play the whole fourth quarter, boosting the counting stats, right? You look at a guy like Penix or Bo Nix, maybe they run it for most of the game, score a lot of touchdowns that way, and then, you're up 50-0 in the third quarter and you sit him, right? And then there's less stats at the end of the game. So I think that can play a factor in the future games as well. regardless of win or loss, playing in the fourth quarters could help him compared to, Bo Nix. We've seen Bo Nix sit out the fourth quarter of the Colorado game, right? And so sit out the fourth quarter of a couple of the first games as well. He played one drive in the Portland State game when they won 81-7, right? If he plays that whole game, he knows what his stats are, right? And same for Michael Penix. So I think that what you mentioned a good point there with the defense not being as good, it almost forces him to be in the game longer, helping his stats.
Of course.
I heard you mention though that you had USC in Colorado, or USC losing to Oregon and Washington later in the year. I think that's a perfect segue into our next segment, which is the playoff outlook, right? This seems like it's one of the most wide open years we've had in recent memory with Georgia. The defense is so good. The offense is kind of lackluster, right? Alabama doesn't have a quarterback this year in terms of at least high quality, right? Clemson's kind of off the map at this point. Michigan's looks so, but they don't play a tough schedule until Michigan at the end of the year, and Penn State. Ohio State hasn't looked very good since Stroud left. The offense is kind of stagnant at times. I just want to know, give me your overall analysis thus far on where things stand with the playoff, right? Are there any teams that are already out in your opinion? Any teams that need to win out to make it in, or anything like that?
Well, kind of a great point to what you said, how it's very wide open. In my eyes, I don't think there's a true number one team like there has been in years past. Past 2 years,
Exactly.
Georgia's been the clear number one team. Bama for, seems like a whole decade, they've been a clear number one team. But this year, it's really anyone's ball game. And I actually have a couple teams that I feel like have the best chances of making the playoff. So first off, I think Texas and Oklahoma have the best chances at making the playoff. The reason is their conference is just not good. You see the Pac-12. There's a lot of great teams. Even the mediocre teams can pull off an upset. Wazoo looks great. Their offense is elite. They can pull off an upset against a great team. Even the SEC, anything can happen. Some lower tier teams can look good. The Big Ten obviously is top heavy, but what we see in Texas and Oklahoma, they face off this week. The winner of that game doesn't have another big game the rest of the year. They're most likely going to win out, and it really comes down to this one game this week, and the winner of that will most likely make the playoffs. So I'll start off there. I think Texas, Oklahoma they have the easiest paths. Who do you think has probably the next easiest path?
Well, before I get there, I do want to touch on that. I think that's a good point you mentioned in the fact that, given that they've already played Kansas in terms of Texas, the last real test, at least as of now, is Oklahoma this upcoming weekend. So, TCU, we'll see. Maybe, do they get on a run? We know they were decent last year, right? Did they pull off a run here and kind of be a competitive team and force some trouble, right? That game will be at home for TCU. But I'd almost say that given where the other conferences are, the winner of the Texas and Oklahoma game this weekend I'd give it like an 80% chance to make the playoff, right? Assuming
Absolutely.
The biggest wild card is if one of those teams is if the loser of that game comes back and beats them in the conference championship. Then it's like, well, who do you put in? They both beat them once, right? And so were there any other losses from either team throughout the season? I do want to say that currently number 10 in the AP poll is currently Ohio State. I would almost argue they're out regardless, because obviously they already won loss to Ohio State. They can't lose again. Because obviously they're out with 2 losses. But their schedule, you're looking at it. I clicked on the wrong team. Sorry here. They beat Duke, great win against Duke this past week, but they have a USC game coming up this weekend, or in 2 weekends. They play number 25 unranked undefeated Louisville this weekend. So the schedule is solid. It's not that, but it's that they beat USC has a tough schedule, right? We talked about it. They play Utah, they play Washington, they play Oregon, and so forth. Do they UCLA as well? That USC plays. Obviously, if Notre Dame loses that game, they're out. If they win that game, then USC still wants to 1 loss. USC probably won't go undefeated the rest of the conference. That's already 2 losses minimum right there. Then that USC win looks less and less impressive. Also, on top of that, they don't play a conference championship game, so they don't get the opportunity to play like a top 8 team at the end of the year to boost their status, right? So I would almost argue that unless every team managed to lose a game or two up at the top, Notre Dame is almost surely out. I think who has the best chance currently is, I hate to say it because I don't think they're very good, Florida State, right? They've already beat Clemson. They just beat that's some close games against Boston College and Clemson as well. But looking at their schedule here to play left, the ACC is just not as strong, right? We just saw Duke lose this past weekend to Notre Dame. The stats of Riley Leonard, I think he's out for the year. Is last time I checked. Miami is currently the only solid team left on their schedule aside from Duke, who's without their quarterback right now. So, I mean, are they just going to stroll through that? And there's not even another true threat in terms of a conference championship opponent, right? So they might just breeze through. So I would argue that the Texas and Oklahoma winner has about an 80% chance, and then Florida State's got about a 50% chance to make the playoff at minimum, I'd say, with the schedule they play and how easier it is.
Absolutely. FSU plays number 19 Duke. They're not really an aspect anymore without Riley. Miami, they've looked good out the gate. You never know. They play them late in the season. We'll see how Miami stands back when they're there. And then the last game of the year is at Florida. Could be tough. I don't think Florida's that good this year. So I definitely agree with you. I think FSU has the second best chance to make the playoff outside of Texas and Oklahoma. And my question for you is, do you think Pac-12 teams have an advantage because of how good their conference is? Do you view that a one-loss Pac-12 team could get in over a one-loss ACC winner, a one-loss Big 12 winner, or even a one-loss Big 10 winner?
It goes both ways, right? If you're comparing simply one-loss teams, I think they clear it no problem. The odds of those teams, right? The Big 12 winner of the Texas Oklahoma winner and the Florida State if they're undefeated, the odds of those teams going undefeated are so much higher than any of the Pac-12 or Big 10 teams, because just like in the Big 10 as well, Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State all play each other. It's like a round robin, right? Same with the Pac-12 with the three true best teams in the Pac-12, USC, Washington, and Oregon. They all kind of round robin style play each other as well. So one of them, if not both of them, are bound. Two or three are bound to lose a game, or if not one, right? So when you look at it from that standpoint, the odds of going undefeated are so much more difficult. But a one loss, I'd say, certainly gets in over those teams if they have one loss as well. Now, currently, we all know that Georgia's in the SEC East compared to Bama is in the SEC West and all the better teams. Do you currently have Georgia in your playoff right now? I'm curious about that. Just Georgia specifically. No one else yet, but just Georgia.
Here's my problem with Georgia. Like you said, you hit it right on the nail earlier. Georgia's defense, elite. Their offense, shaky. This past week against Auburn, they showed that they are beatable. They have a lot of weaknesses. I think a better teams can expose them, but I do have them in the playoff just because it's going to come down to the SEC championship, because I don't see them losing the – sorry?
Yeah, I'm just saying, who they play in the SEC championship, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, things get really interesting if Georgia loses in the SEC championship after going an undefeated regular season. That's going to be a tough question for the board. I'm biased. I would love I want to see a Pac-12 team in it in its last year of existence. But there's a lot of love for the SEC, a lot of love for Georgia, so you never know. But I do have them in the playoff just because I don't see them losing to Kentucky, Missouri, Ole Miss, or Tennessee. They're all solid teams, but I think Georgia's still better. Their defense will bail them out. But I do still have them making the playoff.
Yeah, so with Georgia, they're in the SEC East, obviously, so they don't play, with the divisions in the SEC. You have Bama, LSU, Auburn, and those teams in the West. So they play each other every year regardless. Georgia avoids, I don't know how it's possible, but they managed to avoid LSU and Alabama again this year. Not that Alabama's great, but it's still a quality opponent, obviously. I look at it and while you see some quality matchups, right? Number 20, Kentucky, 21, Missouri, 22, Tennessee, number 16, Ole Miss. Aside from Jackson Dart and some of the big games he's played in, where is the true, bona fide stud quarterback play you're going up against, right? There's no Bryce Youngs you're going up against, or Michael Penix, or any of those guys that you're going up against, right? And so, that's kind of where I struggle to see how their offense is good enough. They have enough playmakers. Obviously, Brock Bowers, we saw, was incredible this past weekend.
He's so good.
Absolutely. You wonder if, because they're probably a shoo-in for 24 to 27 minimum points a game. How many of those quarterbacks and unproven offenses are going to be able to score enough points against Georgia to win a game, right? Now, if they were to play a team with a star-studded offense like the Pac-12 or even Michigan, that's a different story in terms of, can their defense hang but offense score enough points too? That's a topic for another day. But this is more so just currently, I do have Georgia in the playoff as well, strictly because of the schedule they have and the unprovenness of the opponents they play, right? They don't play a Jaden Daniels and an LSU, right? Jackson Dart could give them some trouble in Ole Miss, but other than that, I don't see any true tests that are going to say, oh, they're not going to win those games. I think we'll head over to the Big Ten now, and obviously you got the three-headed monster at the top: Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State. What's your kind of your early takeaway there, and what's going on up there?
Well, it's unfortunate of how the Big Ten's oriented in the divisions. But I have Michigan as the favorite. I think Michigan will go into Penn State, take care of business. Penn State, don't get me wrong, their defense is elite of the elite, top 5 defense in the nation, one of the top, I think, top 3 scoring defense. Penn State looks great, but their offense just isn't there. They have a system quarterback, a system offense that's not going to work against elite defenses. And I don't trust McCord either down in Ohio State. So I think Michigan is going to take care of business and go undefeated and win the Big Ten.
So obviously that means you got Michigan winning the game, which is I think at Ohio State this year. If I
They host it.
They're home actually. That's a big advantage. Again, you look at the schedule: Minnesota, Indiana, Michigan State, Purdue, You got Penn State, Ohio State in two of those games in 3 weeks for those teams. I also as well have Michigan in the playoff. You look at these teams and you're thinking, with Penn State, the defense is incredible, and you credit the fact they have not turned the ball over really at all. Technically, they turned it over on the fumble and the kickoff, but in reality, they haven't turned it over yet. So, but it's not a big play offense, right? You wonder when they go up against a good defense like a Michigan defense, how will their offense fare, right? You got the freshman quarterback Drew Aller in there, first-year quarterback. How will he play in a big game, right? They are at home for that game, but nonetheless, I don't know how much I trust the Penn State offense in that game, nor do I trust the Ohio State offense, right? You have Marvin Harrison, maybe a top 5 pick in the draft, but the quarterback play has been inconsistent, right? We saw them score 17 points against the Notre Dame team. I believe that Michigan can score at least 25, at least 24 against the Ohio State team, and I think Michigan's defense is better than Notre Dame's, and we saw Ohio State put up 17 at the buzzer against Ohio State, right? Or 16, 17, I forget what the exact score was of that game, but nonetheless, I don't think their offense is potent enough to win the game, which obviously with the round robin style, essentially whoever wins those games is going to be in the championship game, the Big Ten championship. And then obviously I'd have Michigan rolling whoever they play. So that means you have currently Georgia and Michigan in your playoff. Did I hear you correctly? I heard you correctly, right?
That is correct. They got Georgia, Michigan, and Texas going undefeated and making the playoff.
Okay, cool. So why don't we head over to, obviously kind of the last wild card is it going to be an ACC school, notably Florida State, most likely I would assume for you, or is it going to be a Pac-12 team? Which one, if it's a Pac-12, who would it be, and do they go undefeated and whatnot?
I think if we're looking at the Pac-12, in my opinion, the most dominant overall team is Oregon. I think their offense is incredible on the run and in the air. We haven't even seen Bo Nix need to make the big play and take true control aside from Texas Tech, the Texas Tech nail biter. And then not to mention the Oregon secondary vastly improved from last year. They'll be able to shut down any playmakers. I think SC has too weak of a defense, and I think Washington is just too shaky on both ends. They're elite on offense, but I don't think their defense will be able to hold Bo Nix and the Oregon's offense to under 30 points. And I do see Oregon's defense being able to take control and at least limit the damage from elite quarterbacks like Caleb and Michael. So I have Oregon not going undefeated, but going 11-1 and then winning the Pac-12 championship and then clinching out that 4th playoff spot.
Who do you have them losing to? You said you have them going 11-1. Who do you have them losing to on the schedule?
I do have Oregon losing against Washington this coming after this bye week. It's a tough atmosphere, and I just think they're not going to be as prepared. Even though they have the bye week, they're not going to be as prepared as they could be when they face them a second time in the Pac-12 championship.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So with the Pac-12, I while I don't want to discredit what Washington State has done, I think we can all acknowledge that it's truly a three-headed monster race in the Pac-12 with Oregon, Washington, and USC. Now we just saw USC and Washington play a common, or USC and Oregon play a common opponent in Colorado. the offenses are about the same. Oregon, although packed it in with Bo Nix at about halfway through the third quarter. So got to take some stock into that and maybe add a touchdown or two to the box score for them. But you saw the defense, right? 6 points allowed compared to 41 for USC. So I think that because of that, because of the lackluster defense from USC, we see consistently year in, year out with Lincoln Riley more specifically. I don't trust them, right? You're going up against a multi-dimensional offense in Oregon with the run and the pass. And then you're also going up against a just secondary eating machine in terms of Washington that's going to throw the ball all over the field. Michael Penix might touch 500 yards in that game. I would not even be surprised. He might go 5 touchdowns in that game. I would not be surprised. I have them losing actually both those games. I don't think they'll win either of those games. Now, I don't want to discredit that, right? You talk about Caleb Williams. He is the guy, we're not going to get into the draft, but he's the guy who's going to be the number one pick and a guy who you would hope can overcome, a poor defense and can make the play, right? If there's anybody in a shootout you trust, it would be Caleb Williams, you would think, right? And so it's not to discredit USC and Caleb Williams, but it's more so acknowledging how good Oregon's defense has looked and how Washington's defense is certainly serviceable to protect against, a potential shootout against USC, right? So I got, obviously that leads it down to Oregon and Washington. And with the Pac-12 changing its structure to where it's actually just the top two teams in the conference making the playoff or making the conference championship and not the North and South winner, I have Oregon and Washington playing this week. Obviously, they're playing this in 2 weeks. And then I haven't played again in the Pac-12 championship, actually. I actually have Oregon losing to Washington State, beating Washington this first game. I think that would, if they were to trip up on any game, it would be the second one after an emotional win. And then they would play Washington again in the college football playoff or the conference championship. And I have them winning that game as well. Strictly because of how great their defenses look so far. I think Dan Lanning's second year really coming into form, motivating his guys. Got a lot of guys in the transfer portal this year. We see how great the secondary, more specifically the secondaries, look so far. And I get it. There hasn't been a ton of true tests, right? Obviously, the biggest test is coming up with Washington and then Washington State back-to-back. But there's nothing I've seen so far that's going to discredit or discount what I've seen with Dan Lanning and Oregon and make me not trust what they have. Combo that with the offense, I like what I see. Obviously, we both have Oregon in the playoff instead of Florida State. So do you have Florida State going undefeated until the ACC championship, or do you have them making it all the way or losing before then?
I've seen Florida State with their faults. We obviously saw them against Boston College, how they struggled. I actually have them losing to Florida the last week of the regular season during rivalry week. I think it's going to be a tough atmosphere no matter what. Florida fans will show up. Great student section, tough place to play in. And I think they're going to drop one right at the end. But if they do manage to go undefeated, they unfortunately would have the edge over the Pac-12 winner.
Yeah, and so obviously we have Georgia making it, Texas making it both, Michigan making it both. I do think it comes down to, does Florida State lose a game, right? Because I do think that all of the Pac-12 teams, all three of them, the top three, will lose a game. But it's more so, does Florida State lose a game? And I think they will, based on how they look so far. Whether it's an away game at Wake Forest, an away game at Pittsburgh, right? Away game at Florida, any of those. But anyway, Ryan, we gotta wrap this up. I really appreciate you joining the show. It was awesome to talk some football with you. Got a big game this weekend, obviously Texas, Oklahoma. Can't wait for that. And I appreciate you joining the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great talking about football. Can't wait for the season coming into full form.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for the support, and I will see you guys later this week. Have a good one.